So a student has kindly let me use her notes as an example of how I'm going to be grading your notebook. And I want you to see what exactly goes into a good set of notes. And there's a lot of good qualities to these notes. They're not perfect by any means. There's a great deal of work that's not in the notebook. Some of it was in a sleeve on the front cover. That's not ideal. There's some content missing. The notes are skewed because of the scanner and how the scanner read the notes. There was a lot of trouble getting these things scanned. But there are a great deal of notes as far as volume. There's about 62 pages, one-sided. About 5 of them are handouts, maybe 6. So there's a great deal of content recorded. There's just still some content missing. Remember, we're talking about 45 school days. You know, if you subtract all kinds of activities and such, you're still talking about 35 days of notes. And a lot of that was, as one student said in class, fairly dense. You did have some time with doing projects and labs, but I still expect you to take notes. Even when you're building proteins, you should be taking notes on what you're learning and how you're learning it. If you're not, I question whether you're learning or whether you're kind of dragging your feet and wasting a little time, which is fine. We all have to do that sometimes, but the majority of your notes should be here. So what I kind of try to look for is about 90% of whatever number is reasonable for an A. So if we think of 30 pages or 35 pages as reasonable, then 90% of that 35 would be reasonable. So when we're looking at, your notes, you're obviously looking at some, not just content, but I'm looking for evidence of revision, where you went and found out information and brought it back to the notebook and added it to the notebook. So one place where you're going to study from, rather than having your notes scattered across all kinds of different media. One other thing is what I'm looking for is some evidence of reflection, where you're putting in questions or highlighting and putting in questions about what, whether it be the question I asked in class or whether it be a question you ask or some other student asks, something that shows reflection on the content, that you're just not writing the stuff down and then forgetting it until the day before the exam. And some evidence of that you can use these notes to recite, so that you can cover up half the page or a third of the page and really get to quizzing yourself or quizzing others with them. And of course, I'm looking for completeness. So, do you have the content that's going to be on the exam? Are you getting the gist? Are you writing down the main ideas? Now, remember, we don't want to copy down everything that's in a PowerPoint or in a discussion or in an activity. Indeed, a lot of times you have some of that printed for you. What you need to do is you need to be able to write down the important information, find that important information. So let's take a look at this first day's notes and see if we can't work some of this out as we go through and grade the notebook. So I like the first page. It obviously is the stuff that either I wrote on the board or was on PowerPoint. I believe this was all on a PowerPoint. So she highlighted this section here, which I often repeat in class, which is, studies have clearly shown that if you'll forget about 60% of the stuff if you don't take notes, and you'll remember about 60% if you take some kind of notes. And if you're organized and have a system, and this system being the one that we're using in class, you're going to remember something like 90 to 100% of the notes indefinitely. So, because your notes are there for reference, you can always go back and study. And remember, we're trying to get to the point, and we've really run out of time. You're either there or you're not. You're either going to be able to do this or not. Where at the end of, come March, early April, you'll be, mid-March, you'll be able to use these notes to study for your April exam. So, these are pretty complete. They show evidence that things are written down. She put her summary kind of up at the top. She has some really a very important question: when should you take notes? And please take a look at this. And I think it's the reason I'm spending so much time with this is because this is the notes on how to take notes, and this is what we're grading next week. So when you're talking about you listen to the lecture, when you listen to the lecture, you should be taking notes. When you're reading the textbook, you should be taking notes. When you watch a film or a short YouTube video, you should be taking notes. I mean, why are you doing it if you're not trying to learn something? And if you're not trying to forget 60% of it, why aren't you writing some of it down? Recall information about what happened to you in class, a meeting, an activity, as I said, a lab, or building a protein in an activity, right? So you should be writing down information that's important. So for instance, I would not have written down when you were building that carbohydrate, that disaccharide, or building the carbohydrate chain, or when you were building that protein, I would not have written down, Janie gave me a pen. I would not have written down, I chose to use green color, all right? What I think I would have written down is, I see that primary structure is a sequence of amino acids, and I see that secondary structure is the folding of the amino acid into one of two shapes, alpha helix or beta pleated sheets, and that this is due to the carbon backbone. You talk about tertiary structure and how that has to do with the interaction between the side chains, the R groups. You talk, that's the kind of stuff that I would hope that even though you are spending your time building a protein physically, and hopefully you get some kind of intuitive knowledge of what that means in three-dimensional space, but hopefully you're writing down information that maybe is an aha moment for you during the lab. Things you're able to take away from doing the activity. And if you're not having any takeaways from the activity, then why are we doing it? Why are we spending precious class time doing it? There were a lot of takeaways from every activity we did, and if you didn't take anything away, my question is how much of your mind was in the game that day. And so let's go ahead and keep moving. So, you see here that you're gonna take you divide your notes into two parts, and there's no date up here. It's not really a Cornell note, so there's somewhat an attempt here. You notice that there were a few days before this where I don't think this young lady even expected to have to take notes because we started pretty much on day one. So let's move on to the next slide. So here's the back of this, and you see that there's a reflection piece. Also, the summary is a good example of reflection. Summary is not the only example of reflection. It's just it's the most obvious. And in the summary, you have to write down, in my opinion, I'm looking for, did the student get it? Did the student understand the main idea of what we were talking about that day? Or is the student lost? It becomes really obvious when, well, number one, when you can't write a summary, when you don't know what's going on, you can't summarize it. Number two, when that summary is poorly done, or three, when it's completely off task and misses the boat, just is way off the main idea. So either way, it gives us information that we can move towards and improve on. So in this first quarter, we were really busy with a lot of other activities, a lot of other formative assessments, and you had some growing pains on how much you were or were not going to do for Cornell notes. Some of you, in fact, pretty much refused to do it till the fourth or fifth, about the second or third week. So I said I wouldn't start even grading the Cornell format until that time. But the spirit of Cornell, the foundation of Cornell, is number one, it gives you an organization, which is key. You have to have your notes organized. But number two, more importantly, is that whole reflective piece and the revision. So when you write something down, often we write things down incorrectly, or our understanding of what we write down might be incorrect. So I'm looking to see if you've corrected those in your notes. Because if you're not correcting them in your notes, you're probably not correcting them in your mind, and you're walking along, thinking you're learning, thinking you should be doing well on a quiz or an exam, and thinking you have it, and then coming back from receiving your grade with a sense of disappointment. And the disappointment could have been avoided had you learned it correctly the first time. And you have plenty of ways of learning that, right? You have plenty of ways of getting that content from an after-school session, from lunch, from just doing it in class, from reading the textbook, which I know a lot of you just don't want to do. But reading the textbook and trying to figure things out. Too many of you are trying to find an easy way out of this. Find the fast and easy way of learning this material, moving on, memorizing something, then regurgitating on an exam. Those days are over in our society. You have to be able to manipulate the information and choose to process it in such a way as to be productive, as to produce something. All right. So we have to label. You see, one of the things that I mentioned early on is labeling with the name, the date, the class, the block, and other information. And Mr. Krupa went into detail on how that labeling process works. And then here again, here's a kind of Cornell note on this side. What do we take? Why do we take Cornell notes? And he goes through and explains it all that, and we do key terms and diagrams and references and steps of solution. Now this is, all these are key of why you should be taking these notes. And you write down only the most important and listen for repetition. A couple of students, they came up and said, I took notes on the PowerPoint. What more do you want? I want you to process. I want you to listen to how I'm explaining it in class. It's not just about writing down the key points from a PowerPoint. I'm there to explain those PowerPoints, to explain the meaning behind the letters. You can't memorize everything. It's not possible. And even if it were, it's not going to mean anything. So you're not going to be able to answer questions unless the questions are just simply identification questions. Those lower level questions aren't the kinds of questions you're going to get on standardized exams. They're not the kinds of questions that this school or this district or this state or this country expects you to be able to answer. So to be successful, we have to start improving on that expectation of what kinds of questions you get and what really is learning. Let's move on. So you see here, there's more active listening. And I've mentioned this to a number of you. You want to actively listen. You want to maintain eye contact, which a number of you don't. I've identified, and we've spoken to and have conferences, some students just are looking out a window, or they're looking at their papers, and at the end of the day they say, I didn't get much out from that. I wasn't paying attention. The material was too dense. You won't ever know if you could have gotten it or not if you're not using your active listening skills. So if you're not maintaining eye contact, if you're not responding, 90% I think of the class is doing, maybe 90% of the class is participating, is doing active listening, but a large portion just isn't. And so it really hurts your understanding, and it must be really frustrating for you to just try to take an exam where you really don't understand the material, or you think you do, and then you're surprised by the results. This has to be, you have to start admitting that you're not actively listening, which is why we spend 3 minutes every morning doing our mindful meditation practice, to try to clear your mind and allow you the opportunity to focus on what you need. So here are the steps of Cornell note-taking, and move through. There's a summary here at the end where she summarizes pretty well what all those 3 pages of notes were about. As we move on, you see she starts now to label it. There's a date that's on the 16th of August. By that time, we've had a few days of class. You see that we already started on control group and experimental groups and some examples of control groups and experimental groups, and you had 5 questions on the midterm from this experiments and experimental design and hypothesis, and a number of you weren't able to do well on that midterm. In fact, missed those questions. And I wonder where were your heads during this time? And this was a review of middle school topics. So okay, so when we're moving on, again, here's the summary. I like it. What would I have liked to have seen? I would have liked to have seen some key ideas here, or questions that might have come to her mind, not necessarily during class. These can come back when you're reviewing your notes. And if you're not reviewing your notes, and I know that the biggest problem that people have with Cornell notes is that there's an expectation that you have to be at home and you have to review the notes and then write this stuff down. And you don't like that. You don't like to have to go back and look over your notes. I understand that. Unfortunately, it's something that has to be done if you're planning on learning at the level which this school and this district and this state and this country expects from you. So as we move forward, we see that there's, again, here's another question. She has the idea of writing down questions here pretty well. She has that idea down pat, I think. But I'd like to see more of her questions, her concerns, her confusion. After she goes home and looks at it, does she think about it and then write questions here down for me to answer the next day, or for her to find the answer to in the textbook or in a workbook? Here you have make observations, ask questions, form hypothesis, and test hypothesis. So, and here what I love is that it's systematic, but you see that the diagram shows that it's not linear. It doesn't have to go in one direction. It can go in many directions. It can go back up here. It can go back and forth to asking questions, and a conclusion may lead to more questions, or may lead to an observation that leads to another question. So I like this any kind of drawing that's non-linear, because in middle school and elementary school they taught you do some research, you ask a question, you design an experiment, you form a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you do the experiment, you collect the data, you analyze the data, then you reach a conclusion, and you publish, right? Or some people don't even have the published part, but that's all kind of linear, where in reality scientific research is kind of every which way, in whatever direction the research takes you is the direction you'll end up. So what's key here is that you guys start to understand that the scientific process is more complicated than you might think. All right, so I'm not going to keep going over all the notes. The intent here is not to give you a lecture on the notes, but to look at, see how the notes are, how are they good and how are they not. Again, if I would look at this and I would say this whole section is really good, but again, I'm wondering, where are her questions? Where are her reflections? And this young lady got an A on her notebook because of how well she did her content, because of how well she did this part. But her reflections, her revisions, they're lacking. And without revisions, without the reflective piece, I'm not sure how much she's learning on a daily basis. As it turns out, she improves this as we go on, but it is a concern. So moving on. Wonderful piece here where she's reciting or recording. She's doing a great job recording information. So here she highlighted that she has a quiz on 1.1 on Friday, 1.1 to 1.8 on Friday. And there's no confusion about that. It's written down in black and white and highlighted in yellow. And it tells her what the blueprint is. So unlike so many of you, they got the blueprint, and for many of the quizzes and exams, you didn't even know what it meant, because you just missed this one piece. You didn't that's the moment you're looking out, or you're worried about your partner, or you're getting your planner, or you're packing up your notebook, or something outside the window distracted you and you missed this, and that's one of the questions on the exam, or that's the information you needed to help you study for it. So it's that attentiveness, it's that focus that gets you to that 90, 100% on exams. Our virus is living. This is a really big question. This was the quiz that was on the test, and she wrote it down. Now, she did not write down that this was the essay. And yet, so many of you didn't even know that this was the essay. But it would have been nice if she would have wrote down that it was an essay, some resources where she might find the answer. How about the answer? Why not write down the answer here in your notebook? So when you go to study for your final at the end of or for your end of your exam, there you go. You're looking, not only do you have a question that you know is going to be an answer, a question on your exam, but also an answer that's going to help you study for this question. Too many of you get to this habit of just writing down the question, and that's it. I wrote it down, so I get it. And then you walk in on the exam and say, oh, I remember that question, but you don't have an answer because you never practiced writing down that answer. You never checked your answer. Because after you write your answer down, how do you know your answer is right? You have to find someone that explains it, as it did in class. All right, and here it says here in green, and she highlighted in blue, and then kind of did a wiggly line in green to remember that that she had to bring something, the next shirt for tomorrow's lab, some kind of apron, and she wrote down some more information. She summarized it. I mean, that's excellent. That's really pretty much it. And notice her good questions here. So where could she improve for next quarter, where the grading's going to be a little harder? Certainly make sure she's doing more of these questions and more of this prove by doing, actually do revisions in the notes and doing a separate color, and demonstrate that this is an answer you found out of the textbook, or this is an answer you found after discussing with a teacher. This answer came later outside of class. And you have to work outside of the classroom. You can't just come to class and sit, and you can't go home and just do the PowerPoints without looking for, without analyzing, without reflecting, without revising. So there you go, work. You got more of the again. You'll note that a lot of the questions and concerns, I know this, were they there? Did she have any? The lab was set up really nice. Here's some versions, some information she wrote. There's one of the syllabi that I handed out. She had a bunch of them in her front cover. You really need to have these kind of, I don't put the date on purpose. You should put the date on there, and you should make sure that this is in front of every week. She started to do her summaries at the top margin for some reason. Look, I'm not going to be a stickler. If you do your summaries up here versus down here, that's fine. It's important that you have some kind of system, that you divide the page up into 1/3 and 2/3, but you guys go crazy. I mean, some people, they want to do their notes in a spiral notebook and have tabs for every section, but really that's well organized. But really, is it conducive to really good studying? And I think a lot of times your ideas are innovative, but they're not necessarily the best. And Cornell Notes has already been researched, already been worked out. Just use the one, and it's the one that I require in class. So try to stick to that. Here again, a summary of the levels of organization, and here, summary again. Summary at the top, ideas and important information, not highlighted, not a lot of questions. Like one question might be here, might be what is important. And in this case, what is important is this, and something we covered over and over again, is this 72% water. And of course, the fact that these biomolecules make up the rest of us, right? And so it's these carbohydrates and carbon compounds and lipids and proteins and nucleic acids that we focused on this quarter that will allow us to build a cell and really understand what a cell's about. Unfortunately, you will be quizzed or questioned on how a cell works, and we haven't gotten there yet. We spent a lot of time on these biomolecules. I think it's time well invested. I think it'll pay off once we get into the cell. I hope it'll pay off once we get into the cell. And if you have gotten behind in these and understanding these, I hope you catch up. I hope you're able to look at the cell at least and try to remember what each of these were and how each of these work. So here's your first introduction to estradiol. This is that complicated. In this case, it was, I think, estrogen. And here's carbonyl groups, right? And ketones and aldehydes. We said we're not going to worry about those. The difference is that we just need to know that the carbonyl, where you have a C double bond O, whether it be at the end or in the middle of the molecule, it didn't matter to us. And here's your first introduction to early on, the types of bonds. You'll notice the video I sent you had a DNA molecule, had hydrogen bonding, had carbon. This is early on. And she doesn't have the date, which is really sad because it would have been nice to have that discussion. But she took notes on the video. She added to her notes from an outside source. She revised. So all these ideas that we're going over and over and over again were at least given to you before the 25th of August. And really, you would have gotten the exam then right away, except I really wanted you to understand them deeply. And so we spent some more time understanding polarity. We looked at the different kinds of things that impact polarity. We said water is polar, right? And we talked this to it's like the poster child for polar. And we looked at ions and non-molecular bonds. We looked at nonpolar and polar covalent bonds, and notice how all the organization of the notes is clear. It's in chunks. She has ideas. She doesn't have questions. She doesn't have as many questions as I'd like, but her reflection is undeniable. She has good summaries, each and every one. And again, you guys can pause and look back and copy anything you need. Here's all the slides with the thalidomide and why was it important and what were the details of it. And here is the summary of that particular lesson. Now we're still in August, nearing the end of August, and here's some more stuff about the different foods introduced to you early on. Here is your first introduction to carbohydrates. Look how beautifully drawn it is. It's doubtful she drew this at home. Drew this in class. It's more likely she took her time at home and drew these out clearly. So she took notes in class and listened, and then went home and added these drawings. That's an example of revision. And this is what I'm talking about. You have to be able to look at your notes and then add to them from other sources. When you take a look again, that in each and every step she has everything defined, highlighted, all the major vocabulary words highlighted. She could be a little more thoughtful about what she highlights. Or she could have added more content, more questions. I'm sure she had questions at this point. I'm sure she wasn't feeling or thinking that I understand everything. Or even if she did, she might ask questions like, well, how are we going to use this? How might he test it? What might he ask on a quiz or test? Here's a little vocabulary word. Here's a bunch of content, deep, obvious, purposeful writing, and her summary. Stuff that I put on the boards. I see evidence of her writing things down that I say in class, so she's listening. Her mind's paying attention to what's going on. She writes down. These were written on the board. She wrote it down. Again, dehydration synthesis all the way back in August or early September. and we're now in October. Here's some sterols, testosterone. We see these in the fats and lipids later on, but they've already been introduced to you. Here's some triglycerides. Here's a polyunsaturated, unsaturated, saturated. Here's DNA and RNA. These are all molecules, all notes from the book, and here's notes from class. It's all integrated into a big picture, which is key. Color coding. Now we're getting. We left carbohydrates. We left the general biomolecule, dehydration, synthesis stuff, and we go on right and hydrolysis, and we've gone right into proteins. And this is another example of biomolecules and how they form and then are taken apart, and all the components. And she color coded them. Again, probably not done in class. And more color organization that helps her go back and remember and study and distinguish between all this information. Here's your NCC amino acid. Here's your NCC backbone. All this on the test, on the exam, and your final, and your midterm rather. Here again is her summary at the top. Secondary structure, quaternary structure. Things she just now knows she has to study. And here is the whole Watson and Crick discussion. Rosalind Franklin, another question on the exam. Chargaff's rule, another question on the exam. Base pairing rules. So you see that all the questions in the exam was right here in her notes. The components of a nucleotide. Here's the whole forced succession concept. The activity that we did. Kept this, she highlighted, she put it in her notebook. I saw some people cover in her notebook. I'm going to be very lenient, I think, on this first notebook collection, but you do have to have some basics here. If you look at it carefully, you'll notice in the previous slides, you'll see the whole answer to your forest succession question. Here's your, all right. So here's levels of the forest and all the questions that we might have gotten from this, which we did not final. Here's a whole discussion on fats and what is a fatty acid, and the whole triglycerol, the idea of glycerol versus 3 fatty acids, and that this was an example of an 18 carbon fatty acid, that we have saturated and unsaturated fatty. Here's cis versus trans. This is what cis looks like. This is what trans looks like. So being able to difference between those two and what exactly is trans, not just knowing, trans fat are bad for you, but exactly why and how. Here's a summary. Here's a summary of phospholipids and how they interact with the cell, which we'll be talking about when we finally start our cell unit. Here's the fat diet. Here's a fat diet digestion, how we break fat down. Here's fructose. The functions of fat and how we use fat in our body, not just for energy, but for, in some case, structure when it comes to phospholipids and the lipid membranes. Here's health effects of different. Here's extra credit information that I sent you later, and that's the end of her notes. And so that's 62 pages. Probably 5 or 6 were handouts. Maybe 1 was the back of a page. I don't know how many pages you have, but that's a lot of information. And still, I think there's some information missing. I would have liked to see your notes from the various activities you went to, and even the field trips you went to, or you spent a couple days outside the classroom. This kind of learning, this kind of information is important because it's then integrated into your knowledge base, and you have something to work with when you're out there trying to answer questions on a PSAT, on a standard exam, a standardized exam, or whatever it is that you're trying to get to. All right, well, good luck to you, and I hope you do well on your quarterly district assessment. I want to remind you that the information has yet to be covered, so however well you do, you'll do better after we actually cover it. So good luck, and see you on Tuesday.